So, now that we've explored what emerging adulthood is, let's look at some problems or influences that happen during this phase of emerging adulthood. First, we just have to say that remember that at this point in our lives, we're supposed to be in Erikson's stage of developing intimate relationships. If we do this, then according to Erikson, we will have successfully developed the virtue of love and have an ability to form deep and committed relationships based on mutual trust and respect. But with emerging adulthood, you're putting that off. You're working on other things instead of developing intimacy. Instead of reaching out to people who aren't family members, or even making your own family, you're clinging on to your old family and not moving forward. Remember, this is a time when we're supposed to be reaching past our old family and developing new intimate relationships based on things that really matter, based on common interests. You often wind up befriending work colleagues because you have common interests, or school colleagues, instead of just the people you were born with. Now, keep in mind that at this point, you're also supposed to have your identity pretty well established. But emerging adulthood can really put that off too, which can be a problem. Identity formation is really key in the time of emerging adulthood, as you develop moral identity and achieve the character that is going to last you throughout the rest of your adulthood. Obviously, the identity that we form as a teenager, it doesn't carry us through our entire adulthood, because most adults don't have a lot in common with the teenage selves that we used to be. In essence, during this time, you're supposed to learn to identify as an adult instead of a child, and kind of take that step to the next place. And so by putting that off, you can really put off forming other identities as well, which could enrich your life. Another stressor of this particular time is that, according to Wood in 2017, no stage in life has this many changes except perhaps infancy. You have personal changes, social changes, emotional changes, neuroanatomic changes, developmental changes, all happening at the exact same time in, I don't know, like a 6 or 7 year period. Your living situation, primary relationships, education, marriages, children, identities. Not only do these things change, but they often change repeatedly during this point in your life. You can live in several different places. You can go through a lot of very serious relationships in say your 20s. In a 10-year period, you can have a lot of serious relationships and a lot of different jobs and a lot of these other changes. And these sorts of changes can be quite stressful. Now, in addition to these problems, you also have some influences that are influencing this emerging adulthood that people are going through. I mean, if you think about it, adulthood is defined very differently through the ages. 200 years ago, you could at about the age of 13 or 14, be apprenticed to a wheelwright or a smith or something like that, and go off and learn a trade, and then you're getting your emerging adulthood done in your early teen years. But that's just not how it is anymore. What we defined as an adult 200 years ago, 400 years ago, 800 years ago is just not the same as we define an adult right now. There are, in addition to the cultural changes of how we define an adult, there are neurological changes as well, because the capacities that we have to reflect on the influence of our environment, to reflect on our internal state, to regulate our emotions, to use problem-solving skills effectively to compromise. These skills are not fully developed until the late 20s. So the fact that we're now changing our definition of what an adult is to a point when they have already developed these implies that these skills, such as emotional regulation and reflecting on the influence of the environment and being able to effectively, skillfully compromise, we're now including these skills as part of what defines an adult. Where in the past we didn't do this because we would consider you to be an adult at the age of 18 and you didn't really have these skills yet. The fact is we simply have higher expectations of adults now than we did in pre-industrial times, or at the very least the youth that are entering these stages have these higher expectations. And that's an important distinction, because even if we as a culture don't expect a young person to be completely finished by the time we refer to them as an adult, if the young person expects that of themselves, if they have all these very high expectations of themselves, if they think that these are real, then they will not feel ready to declare themselves an adult and to identify as an adult, because they don't have these other skills that they think, perhaps mistakenly, are completely required of being an adult. Now, since we're talking about different neurological changes and cognitive capacities, I'm going to get into an example here of kind of a neat little research study that was done. And there's another theorist that we haven't talked about a lot, Piaget, and he pretty much said that, unlike Erikson, he said that we were done, kind of cognitively developing at around the age of 12 after we developed the idea of abstract reasoning. And at that point, we're able to think abstractly, understand abstract concepts, understand hypotheticals, that sort of stuff. And so some researchers decided to test whether or not this was true. I mean, did people have the ability to understand all these abstract concepts after the age of 12? And well, they're researchers, so they don't have access to a lot of 12-year-olds. They do have access to college freshmen, however. So they conducted a survey on a whole bunch of college freshmen to see if they could really grasp the concept of hypotheticals, which is a very basic form of abstract reasoning. And what they found was really surprising to them. They found that 75% of college freshmen could not really fully understand the concept of a hypothetical situation. Just as an example, if you were to say to somebody, let's say, for example, that the Greek gods were real. If their response is, but they're not, then they're not really fully understanding the concept of the hypothetical. I mean, you're posing a hypothetical. You're just saying, okay, let's start with the idea that the Greek gods are real. Not that anybody in this room believes that, but that's the hypothetical. And so if the person is kind of pushing back against it, saying, well, but they're not, then they're not really fully understanding the hypothetical situation. And this was the position that 75% of college freshmen were in. Now, this very much surprised them because they expected to, just reinforce what Piaget had found. They didn't expect to refute it. So they did a whole bunch of more research, and one of the things they did was they then tested college seniors. And because the 75% number was just way too large, it was just so surprising that you would get a number that large. College seniors on the same test had a 25% rate of not understanding a hypothetical. And that's a huge difference. We very rarely find that in research, to go from 75% to 25%. That's enormous. And I think it's a very good testament to that sort of neurological development that's happening through these years, that sort of cognitive maturation, whether it's social or cognitive or neurological. It could be a variety of things. They were never able to figure out, of course, exactly why the college seniors did so much better than the college freshmen. But there are exactly three possibilities. One is that they had 3 more years of college. So we professors were just so good, we made these people smart. Obviously, we would like to believe that. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case, that we're just so wonderful that we taught them how to think abstractly. That is certainly a possibility. Another possibility is simply that their brains neurologically grew. It's called a maturation effect when something happens just due to age. And the college seniors were, a few years older. And maybe this is just a natural time where they are going to develop these skills. And of course, the last option is that they're simply better at testing. They haven't necessarily been made any smarter, but they are better at testing, and they kind of know how to give people what they want. But either way, it's a very interesting example of the fact that during this period in your life, and it doesn't particularly matter if it's due to environmental issues like professors just teaching you to understand concepts better, or neurological issues where your brain is physically developing to the point where you can understand things better. The fact is, there's a lot of cognitive abilities that do grow during this time. You're not completely done cooking by the time you leave high school. So let's now talk about what people are more likely to kind of suffer through this emerging adulthood. Because again, don't make the mistake of thinking that everybody is going through this. You put 2 different people in the exact same situation, and they're going to respond to it in completely different ways. One person could be traumatized, and another person would just decide not to care. So we can find certain patterns, however, for those that not only feel the need to have this emerging adulthood, but who tend to linger in it as well, or have various problems that occur during this time. They found that Maston and Coatsworth found that people with a lot of cognitive immaturity were far more likely to suffer the problems of failure at school, bad grades, risky or impulsive behaviors, including things like substance abuse, drug use, suicide, injury due to the impulsive or risky behaviors, criminal activity, and this was all heavily related to just cognitive immaturity. And of course, perhaps they're just slow learners and they're late bloomers, and they'll get that cognitive maturity later on. But for those that have low cognitive maturity, they are going to kind of suffer a lot more with these problems of impulsivity and lack of responsibility. In addition, we have found that low socioeconomic status people, basically poor kids, and people with they're far more likely to have the emerging adulthood problem. People with lower intellectual capacity are more likely to have this problem, and people with essentially unskilled parents. And that's considered parenting quality. Some people just aren't good at a particular thing. Even if you really love your kids, doesn't necessarily mean you're good at being a parent. You might not just have that skill. And even if you have that skill, that doesn't mean that you're skilled at raising this particular child who might have issues that are a little bit beyond you. Now, of course, the problem with that, because, what are we talking about here? We're talking about people being poor, kids not being particularly bright, or not having great parents. we can't really change any of those things. So these are people who are going to suffer through this at higher rates without necessarily having an easy solution. You know, we can't change who their parents are. We can't make their parents rich, and we can't make the children geniuses. Now, the last problem that I want to go over is called resilience, and I broached the subject a little bit earlier. Resilience is defined as the capacity to adapt to change in healthy and flexible ways during stressful events. And this is obviously not a skill that everybody has, but this is a skill that we can develop during adolescence. Some adolescents are very good at this, and if we don't develop it during adolescence, we are supposed to develop it during our early 20s, so that so that we can adapt to change in healthy and flexible ways. And that's one of the problems with emerging adulthood, is that you're not developing this capacity as much, which is consequently why you're hoping to be taken care of by other people.